My name is Jonas Jørgensen. I work with the Interchurch Council of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Denmark. My task is to work with our international relations, and I especially work with church and society and church and rights.
Could you please explain to us what is Pathways to Peace and why is it important for the European churches?
The Pathways to Peace is a common or joint European project for churches in Europe and in Ukraine to address the situation in Ukraine in preparation for peace. And that is why we have termed it Pathways to Peace. As you know, there's a conflict and a war in Ukraine, and anticipating that we will also and hopefully have to prepare for peace, we are already starting in the churches preparing ourselves for peace.
What are the objectives of Pathways to Peace and how they resonate with the European churches?
There are three objectives. The first one is to bring together church leaders, new or young church leaders as well, including them, with academics and decision makers in Ukraine to start discussing what does it mean to be churches in Ukraine which prepares for peace or rebuild civil society in perspective of peace. What is the role of churches when we are again asking ourselves what kind of society do we want to be in Ukraine? How can we as churches contribute towards that? How are we in a special position to contribute towards such a society? The second objective has to do with the reconstruction of religious infrastructure. That's a bit of a technical term. It means to rebuild the churches, the places where people gather, where fellowship can take place, also in its material or physical shape, you can see. Many churches and worship places have been destroyed as a result of the conflict and the war. In order to make fellowship possible again, it is important to rebuild these churches and places of worship. That's a very costly affair. So what we can do as churches in Europe is to advocate that it should be possible to use common funds, EU funds, to rebuild the religious infrastructure in Ukraine. The third objective has to do with what we call just peace or sustainable peace. Because we believe that peace has to be qualified as a sustainable peace. That means a peace which can be sustained socially, but also, philosophically and ultimately theologically. We think that this conflict started with certain ideas about what kind of society Ukraine should be, especially imposed on Ukraine from Russia. We think that the conflict and the war will end also with the deconstruction of these ideas and with a sustainable and just peace.
What also inspires your church or yourself to be working for Pathways to Peace?
Well, there are several things. First and foremost, the suffering we see among fellow Christians in Ukraine. We feel that it is our duty as churches to address the material need for relief and so on, but also to work on the long perspective changes which we think will be fruitful not only for Christians but for everyone in Ukraine society.
So when we are speaking about the conflict, of course, any war comes with ramifications, human suffering. As a Christian, where do you see the hope?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as Christians, we navigate not only from what we see, but also from what we hope and from what we believe. And we believe that the world can be a joyfully different place from what we know. And especially when you see the suffering, the human suffering, the material devastation, but also the spiritual suffering of people, we believe and hope that things can be joyfully different. And we believe so because of who Jesus is, of course, ultimately. as the promise and the symbol of how things can be joyfully different.